to another Space XPLR episode. So today is a very, very special episode. What I mean by very, if you're a fan of NASA, this is going to be a right episode for you because I have an unbelievable guest. I mean, this guest spent 42 years in NASA, working in NASA. So we're going to be covering a lot of great things. Again, the past experiences, the things he's been working on in NASA, and maybe we'll get some details and insights. What does it take for somebody just like you who are listening and watching this episode to be part of NASA or any space agency, and how you can get involved with these space projects? So today with you is Herb Baker. So Herb recently retired from NASA after, as I mentioned, 42 years of service. He spent most of his career at the Johnson Space Center supporting the Space Shuttle, Space Station, and Orion programs, but also worked at the Kennedy Space Center and NASA headquarters. So his last position was servicing as the manager of the Operations Support Office, which provided support to the Flight Operations Directorate and included support to the Astronaut Office, Mission Control Operations, NASA Aircraft Operations at Ellington Airport, and astronaut training. So he's currently on the board of directors of the NASA Alumni League. And of course, there's going to be all these social media links, which you have to follow Herb. It's going to be LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and the rest of the social media. Everything is going to be there because you need to get in contact with this man. Comment and let him know that you love this man. And because look, 42 years working at NASA, so I'm sure he added tremendous value to NASA, to the people all over the globe. So I'm very flattered to have you on today, Herb. Really appreciate it. So thanks for coming on today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. So look, where do we start? I mean, 42 years, that's pretty incredible. So maybe we can take us back to the time, because everybody as a kid has this dream. Like most of the people that have on the show, they tell about being 5 or 6 or gazing in a moon, or maybe the parents wanted to introduce it, took a glance through a scope into the moon or to one of the stars, and they kind of was it an entry point into the space and exploration. So can you take us to the time of how you started and how did you ended up being at NASA at the same time?
Yes, and it's not quite the story you might expect, but yeah, one of the reasons I spoke in terms of a life with NASA is, of course, even since I retired, like you said, I've continued to be pretty heavily involved with the things that are going on out there. But going back to the early 1960s, my parents actually moved to a town, it's called League City, just south of Houston. And just 3 years later, it was 1963, when NASA decided to build a center. It was back then called the Manned Spacecraft Center, where the astronauts would live and work, literally 6 miles from my driveway at the house I grew up in. And so that was just luck, right? And so 1963, I'll go ahead and tell you, I was 11 years old. And so I think I was just starting middle school, that year or the next year. And so when the Manned Spacecraft Center opened and the original 7 astronauts, and by that time, I think there was a second class of astronauts that had been chosen too, including, Neil Armstrong and John Young and Frank Borman and Jim Lovell and some of those others in addition to the original 7. And so they all moved into my community, and I'm living not far from some of them, and their children were suddenly my friends and classmates in middle school. And so I literally, from the time, is just about as far back as I can remember, going to school and being friends with the Grissams, Cooper, Carpenter, Schirra, Bormans, Lovells, Staffords, still today. Thank goodness for social media. Lost touch with a lot of them when moved away and life happened, and I didn't even know if many of them were alive. And then I joined Facebook in 2009, I think, and started looking for some of those old connections and friends, and of course found many of them. And so now, 11 years later, I'm always up against my 5,000 limit on Facebook, but lots and lots of my old, middle school and high school friends of, astronaut kids that stay in touch with and even see some of them. Mark Grissom, who of course is one of Gus Grissom's sons. I just saw him. It's about a year and a half ago now. I haven't seen hardly anybody for the last year, right? But it was about a year and a half ago I got to see him again. So anyway, middle school, high school, uh, uh, my mother happened to somehow, I don't even remember, and she passed away a few years ago, got a job with the TV networks. When there would be an Apollo mission, they would send a crew down from their studios in New York and rent a mobile home, a trailer, and set it up on site there at the Manned Spacecraft Center and make it into a studio, with the cameras. And that's where they would do interviews of astronauts and flight directors and anyone else that they wanted to talk to and put on TV. And so my mother was working for, had a job with ABC TV. And so she got me a job. And so I'm still a teenager in high school, the summer of 1969 for Apollo 11. And she got me a job as a gopher, you might call it, go for this, go for that, just doing odd jobs. But my main job was twice a day to drive to make a 100-mile round trip to Intercontinental Airport to put film on a plane to fly it to New York to the studios, because back then there was no such thing as videotape or the internet or anything like that. And so if you filmed an interview in Houston and you wanted to see it on national TV, they had to have that physical film in their hands in New York. Yeah. And so again, I did lots of other jobs too, but my main job again was twice a day to drive to the airport to put film on a plane. And so, astronauts are coming in to be interviewed, and I'm just hanging out in the trailer there and meeting them. And I did have, and some of them were posted on my social media. I have several photos of my mother with the TV talent that were on TV, and astronauts like Pete Conrad and Alan Shepard and some of those guys. I didn't get any photos of them myself, but and so I ended up having a job on site at the Manned Spacecraft Center, working for the TV networks, not for NASA, covering Apollo 11, Apollo 12, Apollo 13. I had gone to college for Apollo 14, so I didn't cover that one, but then I came back and covered Apollo 15. And I also had a job with the TV networks covering a couple of the Skylab missions. And so even with all of that, I was not one of those persons who grew up thinking, "Oh, I want to be an astronaut." I look at that. Isn't that cool? The moon and the stars. And, I was certainly not thinking about astronomy or anything like that. And looking back on it, I think it may have been in part just the fact that was just everyday life. I remember talking to some of the children of some of the astronauts and thinking, well, or and hearing them give an answer to a question like, well, what did you think, what was it like with your father being an astronaut? And their answer a lot of times is, well, I didn't think it was a big deal. I thought everyone's father was an astronaut. On the street I lived, my next door neighbor's father was an astronaut, and 2 houses down, their father was, And so, it was obviously still, we understood how cool it was, and it was in the news, and there were, TV people around and such, but you just kind of, grew up with it. And I'm not, although I've learned a lot over the years, working at NASA, you couldn't help but not learn. I'm not a STEM, I'm not a science, engineering, technical person. I went to University of Texas in Austin and studied business. And even then, even after I had gone to college, I was not thinking in terms of working for NASA. I thinking back, I think I probably at the time would have thought, well, yeah, if there's some way I can get a job there, I would love to. But again, I assumed, like a lot of people, which is not true, that everyone out there is a scientist or engineer or a doctor or an astronaut. And so it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to make it short. Again, I'm working in Austin, or going to school in Austin, and I had a part-time job at the Internal Revenue Service regional service center there, just a part-time job to help pay for college. And so that's a federal facility, of course, and the people who worked there were government employees. And so the way you got a government job back in that time frame, the late 60s, early 70s, was you took tests, civil service tests. And so I was working, I remember the day I first heard the conversation of some women who worked in the office around me were talking about this test they had taken and how hard it was. It was called the Professional and Administrative Career Examination, PACE or PACE. And they gave you scores in 6 categories, or skills. And if you made below a 70%, they just didn't give you your score. You just got a blank. And some of them took the test and didn't even score 70 on that particular area. And so I'm thinking, wow, this test must be really hard. But I decided to take the test anyway. And 6 scores, I got 4 100s and 2 98s. And, at first I thought, they've given me the wrong person's scores. That can't be me. But so the way it worked is when you signed up to take the test, you told them where you would be interested if you scored high enough, and a government agency was going to offer you a job. You got to tell them what area or city or state you would be interested in working. And obviously I put Houston, because my family was still here. And so after the tests are over, the company sends the scores out to all of the federal agencies. And if they see someone they like, and the higher your score is, the higher you are on the list, of course. And so if that agency sees someone that they are interested in, they contact them. And so NASA sent me a letter saying, hey, would you like to come interview for a job here? And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, yes. And so again, having grown up here, it turns out that the person I came down and the person who interviewed me when I came down to Houston for the job was the father of one of my high school friends, which, was probably shouldn't have been that big of a surprise, right? But that certainly didn't hurt my chances, I think. And so anyway, 42 years later, what a story. And again, I feel so happy and lucky and blessed to have been able to live a life like that and grow up. My high school friends, we still talk about it. How lucky were we to grow up at that time, at this place, with everything that was going on. So.
And that is beautiful. I mean, that's unbelievable story, and I'm sure there is many different pieces that were missing, as you said. Making a long story short, but it's fascinating to hear that story because that's kind of it shows you how did you get started in working with NASA, and again maybe there's a completely different process now, and maybe you can
Yes.
talk about that too, because I have multiple questions like through social media asking me, can you ask again Herb about how do you get how do you start working with NASA? So can we talk about that process? Is it similar process right now? And again, because you mentioned like you were a little bit surprised that you passed the tests, which the question is is there some certain traits individually people need to know or have kind of skills that would benefit them and kind of giving them a little bit of advantage to make sure that they can have a chance to work with this type of agency?
Yeah. So a lot to answer there. The process clearly is much different. You don't take a test anymore, and even much different than 10, 15, 20 years ago, resumes, paper resumes, no one uses those. I say no one, I really, I can only speak for the government or for NASA. Now it's all online, and it's USA Jobs. And that's for all of the federal government in the United States. Actually, is how you apply for jobs. And there are a fair number of random jobs at random agencies. If today you went and signed on to USA Jobs, and you can pick again by city, and I think even by agency, and there are jobs that are open. Even today, as bad as the world and the economy is with the virus, but I have to say, for NASA, again, at least at the Johnson Space Center, and I think it's like this for most of the centers, they have intern programs. And again, it's easy to find. They call them pathways for NASA. If you want to do a Google search, do a search for pathways interns. And it's a program where you have to be in school, but I think even graduate, well, let me take that back. I think for most of the time I was working, you had to still be in school to get an internship. But I think now I've read that they actually have some postgraduate, I guess maybe they still call them internships too, but the bulk of the pathways interns are still in school. And so what they do is and they do internships three times a year, a spring internship, a summer internship, and a fall internship. And you obviously, I think, I don't know if it's required, but you're not going to school during the internship. You're working full time and getting paid and doing real work, which is one of the things I loved about NASA internships is and of course the students we got were just amazing. A lot of times I would look back, 30, 40 years in the past and think, oh my goodness, if I was competing with these folks, with these students that we have today, back when I got a job, I wouldn't have had a chance, just really amazing, amazing students. But so it does extend your, it's hard to get your degree in 4 years using the typical, kind of calendar if you do an internship. But everyone that I've known who did that thought it was well worth, if you take 6 months to work at NASA, you add 6 months on to your college time. And so we, in terms of hiring new employees at NASA, I would say, I don't know if I could put a percentage on, 90% of our new hires were through the internship program. And of course, like all other internship programs, the one of the good things about that is that we get to see the students, up close and personal, so to speak, in an office environment doing real work, and they get to see us too. There were a few times where the interns, believe it or not, decided that just wasn't what they wanted to do. And so, but again, I think what I really appreciated about the way NASA handled that program is giving, we didn't ask them to make copies or get us coffee or do menial jobs. We gave them real serious, challenging work, and they accomplished a lot of good things, for the agency. So that was it's still going on, of course, a wonderful program. But again, because I get asked a lot too, hey, how do I get a job with NASA? And, so the first thing I do is send them the links to the internship programs and other job information. But they want to send me a copy of their resume. And I said, no, even if I had it in my hand and I walked on site to the HR office at Johnson Space Center, they would just look at me like, what is that? You know, why are you bringing that to me? You know,
Mhm.
you need to go sign up in, you know, USA Jobs, or again, you know, sign up for an internship program. And then once you finished your internship, if we like you, we offered you a job.
Yeah.
And of course, I should also mention though, that just in terms of, you know, working for NASA or supporting the space program, there are many, many more contractor employees, working for the aerospace, SpaceX and Boeing
Mhm.
and Lockheed and those kind of companies. Just for example, at this Johnson Space Center in Houston, when I left there uh, 4 years ago, there were about 3,000 NASA civil servant employees working at the Johnson Space Center. There were close to 15,000 contractor employees working for NASA. You know, many of them sitting right next to the next desk. You know, the only way you could tell them apart is a small difference in their badge, you know. And in fact, most people would just say, I work for NASA, you know, even if they literally worked for Boeing or Lockheed, they just said, I worked for NASA. And they did, really, you know, but that's not technically who their employer was. But
Yeah.
so all of that to say, uh, don't let how hard it is, or how hard it may be to get a job with NASA, stop you from looking and checking with sending a note to the aerospace companies
Mhm.
that support and have employees working for NASA. Because in fact, a lot of times, and the companies were never really happy about that, uh, NASA, if they saw a contractor employee doing a really, really good job that they really liked, NASA would hire them away from the company. And so, you know, those aerospace contractor companies often would lose some of their best employees to NASA. But of course, in many cases, that's exactly what the employee wanted, was to get that job with NASA.
Beautiful. So that's beautiful. So again, I think part of that everybody wants to work for NASA. As I mentioned, there are different options right now. Private companies just like SpaceX or Rocket Lab, or again, if you live in Europe, there is ESA, or if you live in a kind of Asia, there's JAXA and ISRO. So there could be a closer option instead of NASA. But again,
Yeah.
NASA is kind of being this like on
Yes.
a podium always. Like when people think about space and space agency, it's always NASA, because it's always in the movies and it's always
Yeah.
so I think
Sure.
that's why it's on people's heads. But it's fascinating because most of the projects when it comes to space exploration are coming from NASA, at least the most that I'm seeing, personally as well. But the other question that I have from people here on social media, very important question. Somebody asked, does the cafeteria has astronaut packed food once you start to work in NASA?
No, um, the cafeteria just says it's just like any other regular cafeteria, although you're very likely to uh, see an astronaut sitting there, you know, eating breakfast or lunch. And if you didn't know them, you wouldn't know it because they're not wearing their, a spacesuit or anything. But that does remind me, though. Speaking of space food, one of the many cool things about working at the Johnson Space Center, like I said, or as you mentioned, I spent most of my career at JSC, but I also worked at the Kennedy Space Center for a while, and 10 years at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. But I visited every single other NASA center. There are 10 NASA centers, and I visited every one of them multiple times. And my favorite, even over Kennedy Space Center, was if I get to choose any NASA center to work at, I choose the Johnson Space Center. And of course I'm biased because I grew up with it and worked so long here. But we have mission control here, the astronauts work here, the astronaut training are here, even the program managers are here in Houston. But all of that, what I started to say was one of the the other many cool things about here is that they do make and test the astronaut food. And so the food lab, which was just a short walk from the building I worked in most of the time, the last 10 years I was there, uh, if you had time, they did it during the day, and often you had a conflict or a meeting or were out of town or something like that, but they would set up tasting periods where some of the food that they made that they planned to send into space, uh, they would allow employees to taste test it. And I signed up for that every chance I got. I loved doing that. And so what they would do is uh, you walk over to the food lab and they put you in kind of a little private area because they didn't want you communicating with the person next to you and influencing how you rated the food, because you rated it on texture, taste, smell, appearance, like 5 or 6 different, does it taste like you expected to taste? So they would sit you in your little area, and when you were ready, they would flip up the little door and slide a tray with the food on it, and there would be a little cup of water and some crackers because you had to cleanse your palate between tastes. And then there was a little laptop there, and again you would cleanse your palate and then take a taste of whatever food it was, and then on the laptop you would rate it again, in those many categories, and most often the food tasted very good. Again, they're difficulties, I'll call them, with food, preparing the food on the ground that make it different from eating in space. Even things like sodium. Sodium makes the bone density loss even worse than it would otherwise be, and so they really try to limit the amount of sodium that they put in the foods. But again, most of the time the food tasted very good, and most astronauts I talked to did enjoy the food. That varies, like you might guess, from person. I know at least 1 or 2 who just, I won't say hated the food, but they did not like it nearly as much as most of them did. But one quick story talking about that. So guacamole. One day I saw the announcement that, hey, if you're available at 10 o'clock on Thursday, we're taste testing guacamole. And so I signed up for it. I love guacamole. And went and tasted it. It was terrible. I of all of the foods I'd ever tasted there in the food lab, it was tasted the worst of any I'd ever tasted. And so I rated it very low. And of course, with the privacy, I had no idea how everyone else felt about it, but I wondered, am I the only one that, thought that tasted terrible? And so the next week, guacamole again, and I thought, aha, because I rarely ever did the same food, back to back. And so I knew that I couldn't have been the only one who didn't like it because they were trying it again. And so went back and tasted it again. It was still bad. And so, a couple of weeks later, the third time they're trying it, taste testing guacamole again. And so went back, and it wasn't too bad that time. It wasn't the best I'd ever tasted, but if you put it in front of me at a restaurant, I would have eaten it. So I asked one of the technicians on the way out, I says, why was this so hard? And she said, well, one of the problems is, again, we don't use as much salt as we would otherwise. And anyway, to make a long story a little bit shorter, about a year or 2 later, I happened to be on site, and I asked the woman who ran the food lab, I said, what, because I'd retired between there. I said, whatever happened to the guacamole? She said, no, we decided not to do it. It was the shelf life, as you might know, if you put it out, it turns brown, in a matter of hours. And so even though the astronauts had specifically requested having guacamole on their food list, it was just too hard to make, and the shelf life made it too difficult to send into space. So the astronauts don't get any guacamole.
Got it. So talking about the food, I mean, like without going into detail, so was it like part of that was kind of synthetically created, or everything is kind of from scratch, organic, like natural, or have they used anything else to create
Oh,
those?
yeah, that's a good question. They never really told us what ingredients they used. And again, other than me asking that one time about why it was so difficult to make guacamole taste good, and mentioning that, well, one of the things is trying to limit sodium. They again never shared that with us. So I don't know actually. I assume if the general consensus is that organic kind of things are better for you health wise, then they would be trying to maximize the use of those you know more healthy type foods and ingredients than otherwise. But again, honestly, don't know. It's probably again a bit of a trade-off with struggling with, okay, we want to make it as healthy as possible, but if we make it so healthy that it doesn't taste good, they're not going to eat it. So there's probably a balance they had to strike there.
Yeah, got it. So part of that again, because you mentioned that you made your personal choice, Kennedy and versus Johnson. So the Johnson won because you mentioned it has all these different places. So part of the like few of those places is vehicle mock-up facility. I'm just reading through it on Wikipedia. Maybe there's some additional kind of testing sites are created. Mission Control Center, as I mentioned. So neutral buoyancy laboratory. That's part of the Houston also.
Mhm.
So and I mean you mentioned gets you kind of find these astronauts just having lunch at a cafeteria, maybe you passing them by in a corridor, at some point, or maybe they wander off in a laboratory from time to time or different facilities. So, any like stories, fun stories, or interesting stories that you could share with us? I mean, through all these 42 years that you kind of see one of the, famous astronauts that we know that, it's kind
Oh,
of fun to tell.
yeah. Well, yeah, actually, I have a lot of those. One one that comes to mind is that I've always thought was kind of interesting. Um, there was a young woman who was just starting her career at NASA. This was only about, well, now it's been 6 or 7 years, because I was still working there. And uh, uh, so uh, her name was Ruth, right? And so I was showing her around the NASA site, and we walked through the building where the astronauts' offices were, uh, was right next door to the cafeteria. And so we walked through the cafeteria. I showed her that, and then I said, "Here, let's walk into Building 4 South, which is where the astronauts are." And I said, "You never know, you might run into one coming down the elevator or in the hallway, something like that." And so we walk into the building, and standing there by the elevators, and the elevator comes down and the door opens, and Tracy Caldwell Dyson, I don't know if you know her, she's one of the U.S. astronauts. In fact, my favorite photo, I think, of in the space station is Tracy Caldwell Dyson hovering in the uh, uh, oh, now I'm forgetting what they even call it, where the viewing area where they look out uh, through the windows, um, uh, and see the
Oh,
best view of
so
space.
the cupola.
Cupola,
That's
yes, cupola.
yeah.
Thank you. And so anyway, the doors open, and Tracy Caldwell Dyson steps out, and I start to whisper to Ruth, "Hey, that's Tracy Caldwell Dyson." And before I can even say that, she says, "Tracy," and Tracy says, "Ruth," and I'm like, what just happened here? And so just pure coincidence, it had just happened that a couple of years later that they had sat next to each other at some conference or event, and they knew each other already, but I thought, what are the chances of all of the astronauts in this building that are going to come down and run into us at the elevator, that she knows her? And um, one other one that comes to mind, I was in the lobby. I was headed to a meeting, and I was in the lobby of Building 30, which is the Mission Control building. And I walked into the lobby and was about to head down the hallway towards where my meeting was, and I saw Scott Kelly standing there. This was, I think, after he had come back from his year-long mission, and so I thought, oh well, I wonder why he's here. I think I'll just hang out for a while and see, if I can tell what's going on. And so a minute or two later, Jessica Meir walks in. Of course, she was one of the two astronauts who did the first all-female spacewalk with Christina Cook. And so now there's Scott Kelly and Jessica Meir standing there in the lobby. And of course, now I'm thinking, oh, heck, I have to go to my meeting. And so I went to my meeting, and I found out later that just soon after I left, Jim Lovell walked in the door. And the reason they were there was they were meeting in the lobby to go upstairs to the Apollo Mission Control Room for a filming of a PBS, Public Broadcasting System, feature on, three generations of astronauts. The oldest, Jim Lovell, kind of the current Scott Kelly, and then the brand new Jessica Meir. And so I watched the interview on YouTube later, but that was one of the interesting ones.
So that is
But
awesome.
anyway, that's probably good enough. I could come up with some more, but
I'm sure, but that is awesome. I love the fact that you're still, working all these 42 plus years in NASA, and you still like when you meet those people, in the corridors, you're still like, oh my God, look,
oh,
there's those people.
it never gets old.
Yeah,
I'm actually what I would say, good friends with a couple of them, and I've worked with, uh, almost everyone that's ever worked at NASA. I mean, again, literally back to the original seven. Some of them who've walked on the moon, and and so actually, I've met and talked with so they just picked, was it 16, 8 men or 18? Maybe it was 18, 9 men and 9 women for the Artemis team, of which from that group of 18 will be the next people on the moon. And so the first woman on the moon will be one of those 9. And I know 3 of them pretty well, so I would never show any favoritism or anything, but I'm kind of personally hoping, wow, I hope one of those 3, it gets to be the first woman on the moon. How cool is that going to be?
exactly.
But yeah, I like what they call it, fangirling or fanboy. Yeah, I to the day I die, even though I dated an astronaut's daughter back in high school. It just for a couple of dates, and it never turned into anything. But so to the day I die, I will never get tired of understanding and enjoying how cool it is to be around and hang out with astronauts.
Exactly, exactly. So it's exactly the same for me, for the people who are watching or listening to this episode, and the rest of the people who are kind of obsessed and have the passion towards space and exploration. And again, to all these people that are working in all these different agencies, because these people, the astronauts for us, is just like a rock stars for the everybody people. For the
Yes.
ones that don't care about the space science. So for us, those people are rock stars because like who else can like walk in a space and that like one like it's crazy like the stories. So I watched actually the Scott Kelly's documentary. It was where he spent 340 days in space.
Mhm.
So I watched the documentary. So it's pretty insane. I mean the kind of the entire schedule that they go through and how intense it is. There's the training, and it's a lot for people to handle right now, because the threshold is really high for people if they want to become an astronauts for now. And maybe, you would like to touch on that while we're going to be transitioning, because I want to talk about the Apollo, 11 and the Artemis mission that
Yeah.
you mentioned. But talking about this kind of having a high threshold for, for people to become an astronaut. And one of the things that we're looking forward to is creating the moon base, and again with the Artemis missions and flying to Mars and colonizing Mars. Maybe I'm not a big fan of the word colonized, but
Mhm.
is living on the other planet, right? So that means with that it has to be a little bit lower. So do you see that? I mean, what potential problems we could be facing with kind of lowering it, and what's possible ways we as people can prepare for those future, maybe for a younger generation, that I would like to kind of fly to Mars and maybe live there full time. So how I can prepare myself and my body physically, mentally, so I can make that transition from Earth to Mars.
Yeah. And you could get a much better answer from a physician or a doctor or something like that. But I guess I will say, speaking of becoming an astronaut, I remember, oh gosh, 2016, I guess, that class. There's been another class since, but we made the announcement, and I attended every Monday morning. The director of flight operations, who was the manager, the director for the entire astronaut office, astronaut training, mission control, aircraft operations, all of that. He had a big staff meeting every Monday morning, and went around the room, and not like some companies, just talking about what happened during the previous week. There was still work over the weekend. Mission control works 24/7. And so, sometimes things would happen on a Saturday or a Sunday. But anyway, again, the point was, there's this big status meeting every Monday morning at 7:30, before most other activities started around 8 o'clock. And so I was at that meeting every Monday morning. And so I remember this one morning, we were talking about the astronaut applications, and how we had something like 9,000 applications this one Monday morning, and there was still another week to go. And that was the most applications we had ever gotten. And I think then the next week, the application period closed, and we were meeting again, and someone mentioned that we had 18,300 applications, more than twice what we had ever received before. And of course, to be honest, though, part of that was that, even that, and I know a lot of astronauts talk about how, yeah, I remember having to fill out a form with a pencil, and now it's all online. And so what I started to say about, to be honest, I'm sure that some percentage of those were people who had no intention or expectation of ever being selected. They just wanted to go through the process and get their response back from NASA. Thank you for your application, but you didn't make it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so then some short time after that, well, not short time, it was a few months, I pull up to the meeting, or to the building, that early Monday morning, to head into the Monday morning staff meeting, and a van or two vans pull up not far down from me in the parking lot, and like 12 people get out, and they're just laughing and joking and smiling and having a good time. And I'm thinking, don't these people realize it's 7:15 on a Monday morning? How could they be so happy? What are they smiling about and laughing about? Well, it turned out that they were the first group of 12 people who had been selected as potential astronaut candidates, who had shown up to be there for their interviews. And so I thought, oh, okay, well, now I understand why they were all in such a good mood, right? But the other thing is, and I even get asked that a lot, and I know I hear astronauts talking about how they're constantly asked about, how do I become an astronaut? What course should I take? What should I major in college? And there's no answer for that. I mean, there's no, magical or perfect answer for that. You can't say, well, you should study this. The answer is you need to pick something that you're interested in and you're passionate about, because the chances of being selected as an astronaut are really, really, really slim. And you should absolutely not, go to college and study something you're really not interested in just because you think that's going to help you get selected. And then if you're not selected, you're stuck. So anyway, again, the answer is, like I started to say, is you need to find something that you enjoy, you like, you're good at, you're passionate about, and study that. Don't think about it in terms of, oh, I need to do this because that's going to check my box for being selected as an astronaut. That's just a total waste of time.
Hmm.
Because uh, and another thing they look for is outside activities,
Hmm.
skydiving or scuba diving or mountain climbing, or they want to again see that you have multiple talents, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
and also how you get along with other people, because certainly in the space station, and like you said, colonization, or the trip to wherever you're going to colonize, to Mars, the whole human personal interaction thing is going to be a significant issue. Being stuck in a small area with uh, a small number of people for an extended period of time. So
Hmm. Got it. So this is a very great advice because, as I mentioned, a lot of people would love to be an astronaut, but probably they don't figure out like how much work actually goes into it. I mean, anything that you want to be obsessed about, it has to become your life. It's not it's not something that you do 5 days a week and you have 2 days off. I mean, it's constantly. It's you
mhm,
become it. And
mhm,
it cannot be like you're watching Netflix, in your spare time, and it doesn't matter if it's space documentaries, and then you
mhm.
apply for NASA. Oh, look, I want to be an astronaut.
Yeah,
Like it doesn't work that way. Like you have
yeah,
to give your life away for this basically. But
yeah.
but the rewards, it's like, as far as I've seen from documentaries, is just being a rock star among the other scientists and people who have the passion. It's definitely worth it. But as you said, the
Yeah.
chances are very, very slim, but it's
Mhm.
doable. It's definitely
Yes,
doable.
yes, yes. They are going to choose someone.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it is, and of course, that it's even different. Back in the early days, they were all males, and they were mostly military and pilots. And of
Hmm.
course, now it's generally about 50-50, males and females, and all kinds of different backgrounds. It's not just military or pilots, or I mean, they do need some pilots. In fact, that was one funny story. I remember having a chat with an astronaut who was a pilot, and someone asked him if he ever got to do a spacewalk, and and I guess I'd never really thought about it, but he said, "Oh, no, 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 they wouldn't let the pilots go outside the spaceship because they wanted to make sure there was going to be somebody there to to land the shuttle when we headed back home." And I thought, well, yeah, okay. I mean,
Makes sense.
we never we almost lost an astronaut on a spacewalk once, but otherwise, never, that was never a problem. But I thought, yeah, they would not allow a shuttle pilot to go on a spacewalk if you were on a mission. You had to stay inside if you were a pilot.
So there is a pilot and there is a co-pilot also.
Well, that's an interesting point. Actually, no, there's, and a lot of people don't realize that there's a command. No one wanted to be a co-pilot,
Hmm.
so they didn't have a co-pilot. So what they did was they changed the nomenclature to what would have been the co-pilot to the pilot. But the pilot who actually flew the shuttle was the commander.
Hmm.
So instead of a pilot and co-pilot, you had a commander and pilot, but it was the commander who had the wheel.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So talking about those missions, because that's very interesting. Again, we're talking about, because I mentioned I want to, discuss a little bit, July 20th, 1969, for the people, that's Apollo mission. And you're part of that. You've been kind of seeing that with the ABC TV that you worked at the time. You covered that again, 11, 12, and 13, three of these, right? So
Mhm.
can you take us back to the time again, you working with that and having this? Because again, personally, being 30 years old, and I'm sure a lot of the audience never seen a moon landing before. So can
Mhm.
you talk about your personal experience and how, the ways that it impacted personally?
Well, I still remember, speaking of that, and some of the things that I remember very vividly from, literally 50 years ago, when they actually landed on the moon. I was in my car driving to the airport, having to listen to it on the radio. I felt kind of cheated that, here I am covering the moon landing for Apollo 11 for ABC at the Manned Spacecraft Center, and I'm in my car on the freeway, so I had to listen to the actual landing broadcast on the radio. But I was at home watching, sitting in front of my TV like millions and millions of other people when they showed the video of Neil Armstrong stepping down out of the lunar module. Uh, and yeah, I mean, I think we all, almost everyone had to realize what a significant moment in history that was. Yeah, but again, it's funny that there are some things. I can tell you another story about moon landing. I wasn't. I don't know if you wanted to go through the missions one by one, but I have an Apollo 12 story
Please.
uh, that I remember. Speaking about remembering things vividly. Oh well, and so let me back up. I think a lot of people don't realize that Armstrong and Collins were literally on the surface of the moon for less than 24 hours. It was like, I don't know, 22 hours or something like that. And they only did one spacewalk, and it wasn't much further than, 30 or 40 feet. In the later missions, they had a rover, and so they, drove, a fair distance away. But Armstrong and Collins were there for just a few hours and didn't go very far from the lunar module. And I guess I had forgotten that until, at some point years ago, I was reading about it and I thought, wow, that's right. You think if you if you're going to the moon, you're going to stay a while, right? Or explore a little more. But no, it was very, very short period there. And actually, part of that problem, I think, was just a limited amount of oxygen they
Mm.
they had. But anyway, so for Apollo 12, uh, Pete Conrad, Alan Bean uh, were the third and fourth guys to walk on the moon. Uh, and I think so it was Conrad Bean and Dick Gordon, I think, was the third astronaut. And so, most of the interviews that were filmed there in the studio on site for ABC were shown nationally. But for Apollo 12, when they splashed down, they wanted, just a local human interest for the Houston area, video of the family, Pete Conrad's family, sitting in their living room watching the splashdown, as they called it. I don't know. I'm always surprised people say, "What's a splashdown?" Well, that's when the capsule returned to Earth and splashed down into the ocean. That's what they called a splashdown. And so the Pete Conrad family was watching on their TV set in their living room when the splashdown occurred, and they wanted video, or not video, they wanted film of that for a local TV station. So they sent me and a cameraman over there. So I was in Pete Conrad's living room with his family watching their TV when Apollo 12 splashed down into the South Pacific in November of 1969 at the end of their mission. And I still remember, I could draw you a picture of where the sofa was, where the TV was, where I was standing, and then the hallway to the dining room where the cameraman and I walked after we finished filming. And I remember he had a dark bag, and he put the camera into the bag and took the film out so it wouldn't be exposed to light, and put the film in a canister and took the canister out and handed it to me. And I drove back to across the street from the Manned Spacecraft Center. There was a helicopter waiting for me. They were in that big of a hurry to get the film to the local TV station in downtown Houston, which was, 25 miles away. And so I got in the helicopter. I'd never been in a helicopter. And this is, November 1969. And I was, and this guy takes off in that helicopter. He's going, what seemed like 200 miles an hour, just barely over the power lines, and down the freeway. And I'm hanging on for dear life. And he said, yeah, I just got back from Vietnam. I, was flying missions over there in the war. And I was like, whoa, thank goodness nobody's shooting at us. And so I still remember there was no helipad. And so he had to land in an open area across like a 6-lane freeway. And I had to run across that, obviously I had to pick a time when there was no traffic coming, but I remember running across that 6-lane freeway with my film canister. I remember walking in the door, and over on the right, there was a desk, and there was a woman standing there. She knew I was coming. She was waiting for me. And I remember handing that film canister to her. And then I don't remember anything after that. I mean, again, I remember everything leading up to that like it was yesterday. And then it was almost as if, I guess, the adrenaline just, and I don't even remember the helicopter ride home. But so that's my favorite Apollo 12 story.
So personally, why do you think that Apollo 12 again stood up from the rest of the missions for you personally?
Oh, well, of course, one thing was, I don't know if you remember, but Apollo 12 was struck by lightning when it launched, and they lost all of the data in mission control. The data, their screens just pretty much went blank. And for a while, no one knew what happened. And the flight director, Jerry Griffin, at one point, because and this rocket's, headed to space, and there's no way it's going to stop, right? But they had about an hour's worth of backup batteries in the command module where the 3 astronauts were. But they were thinking that if they didn't figure out how to correct whatever had happened, they would have to abort by blowing the astronauts away from the rocket, and then literally exploding and blowing up the Saturn V rocket, over the ocean. But John Aaron, who was the ECOM, electrical and I don't remember exactly what the electrical engineering communication console, he had seen a similar pattern on his screen a year earlier in a simulation. And he figured out, and so when he saw that, when it happened, he one of the reasons for doing simulations is, okay, so what do I do if this happens, for real? And he figured out that there's a switch, SCE, signal conditioning electronics. If you flip it to auxiliary, it resets everything. And so just as Jerry Griffin was thinking, okay, do I have to abort this mission and blow up the Saturn V? John Aaron, who's 26 years old, says, flight, tell them to switch SCE to aux. And there's a wonderful YouTube video about this. It's about 3 or 4 minutes long. If you check, Apollo 12 SCE to AUX, one of my favorite videos. And so tell them to switch SCE to aux. And so this is the John Aaron telling the flight director, but only the Capcom can talk to the astronauts. So Aaron tells flight director, and the flight director tells the Capcom, and so Capcom tells sends up the message to Apollo 12. It says, try SCE to aux, and it says, NCE to aux, what's that? They had no idea. And so finally, no, SCE to aux. And so Alan Bean knew where that switch was. And so he reached up over his shoulder and flipped the switch, and everything came back. And they all started laughing. Then you can hear in the YouTube video, you can hear Pete Conrad just cackling. He's laughing so hard. And I thought, wow. Who knows what would have happened to the entire program if they had had to abort that launch or mission and blow up the rocket. So that's my favorite actual mission story about Apollo 12. So yeah, that was a very interesting one. And so now Alan Bean, who I got to meet, passed away. Oh gosh, it's probably been about 2 years ago now. And I'm good friends with his wife, Leslie. Another interesting story, if you don't mind hearing interesting, what I think. So at the Johnson Space Center, they have, they set it up after the Challenger accident where we lost 7 astronauts. There's a memorial grove of trees that when an astronaut passes away, they have a ceremony and dedicate a tree and put a plaque at the base of the tree. And so there's this beautiful grove of trees at the front part of the Johnson Space Center, of the Astronaut Memorial Grove. And every holiday season, like now, they put lights around the trees, and they're all white lights on every tree until recently, except for one, and it had red lights. And of course, you can see just people driving down NASA Parkway in front by the Johnson Space Center. You can see all these trees with white lights in one. And I know, I had friends who said, I always wondered why there was one tree with red lights. And so the story was Pete Conrad was known for a quote, "If you can't be good, be colorful." And so when they dedicated his tree, they decided forevermore to put red lights on his tree and white on everybody else, until his best friend, Alan Bean, passed away. And I can't tell you, I actually have it on my Facebook page, and I'm not sure if it's on Twitter or Instagram, the whole story about Alan Bean's tree also got multicolored lights. His again, they're all white except Pete's, who's a red, and Alan has the green and red and blue and yellow, and so now there are 2 trees with colorful lights. And there's a wonderful story about that his wife, a widow, Leslie Bean, tells. Yeah, friend me on Facebook, and you can, or I think you don't have to even friend me if you just go to my Facebook page, and not too far down is a story about the holiday lights in the Astronaut Memorial Tree Grove.
And that is beautiful. That is beautiful. And I love the fact that the story behind the red kind of ornaments on the tree. So it's beautiful because we need to, we as humans are very, we are good in that way, expressing our personal feelings towards, again, that was, one of the saddest moments, again, with, what happened again with the program, with the space shuttle program. But, it's part of that is learning, part of that is innovation. So part of that is just life. So, and like the part of that is right now the Artemis, when we talked about the Apollo mission. So now we're talking about the Artemis, the first woman who is going to be on the moon right now. And we're kind of planning to create probably some sort of a moon base, again, which probably is going to be, as far as I've seen, like on Wikipedia. I don't know how much you can trust Wikipedia, but it says that the private companies would be allowed to kind of create some sort of a, habitat in those environments. So Can you talk about the Artemis program? I mean, have you seen anything once you've been there? Because again, I know it's kind of brand new, program, and but people are really looking towards that. So maybe you can have a, maybe you can kind of express yourself and explain like what type of feelings and personal perspective do you have about this mission?
Yeah, and so that whole program has come up since I retired, but a couple of things I can say. So back in 2000, I'm not sure I get the year exactly right, 2005, 2006, the uh, Constellation program was put in place, which we were going to go back to the, NASA was going to go back to the moon. In fact, I had already been assigned to, they had set up a lunar lander office to manage the development, design, development, and production of whatever new lunar lander we were going to use. And I had already been assigned to support that office. And then, as you probably know, the Constellation program was canceled. That's the bad news. The good news was that in addition to the lunar lander and landing on the moon, part of the rest of the program was a big rocket, which survived and is called SLS, and Orion, which was uh, people call it Apollo on steroids. It's similar to the Apollo capsule, but it's a little bit larger, about 1.5 times as large. And so that's Orion. That became Orion. And so instead of the Constellation program with this rocket and capsule and going to the moon, it just became the Orion project and the SLS project. But they survived, and they're still, although gosh, now, many years later, and we haven't launched either one of them. Thank goodness for SpaceX and hopefully soon Boeing. But yeah, so I was very excited about the thought of, back in 2006, 2007, going back to the moon. I loved the idea, and again was very excited and was really hoping that we would make it. And so obviously was disappointed when the program was canceled, but at least was happy that we managed to keep Orion and have SLS. And so I love the thought too of finally having women more involved in the space program, and certainly they deserve to have one of them walk, being one of the first, when we do get back to the moon, being one of the first astronauts to walk on the moon. So I'm very happy about that. And yeah, I'm not sure if I guess 2024 was supposedly the magical date, and I'm not overly confident that we will make it by then, but I would be very happy if we did. And so along those lines, I know, and I don't follow too closely, but I know that here recently the Senate approved the NASA appropriation bill on a 100 to nothing vote. And wow, how in today's world, how rare is that to have consensus, unanimous, 100 to 0. No, not a single senator voted against NASA's, I think it was $23.3 billion appropriation bill. And so that was really made me happy. I understand the House version wasn't quite as generous, but back when I was still working there, so only 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, we were still in the teens, of billions of dollars for a budget, 15, 16, 17 billion dollars. And so 23.3 billion, boy, that would be That would be
maybe.
great if NASA actually gets that. They might actually be able to make 2024.
Well, I think if we adjust again the amount to the inflation, so it's probably the same or probably even less right now. Because again, if we're talking about our Artemis mission, which it costed like 35 billion, and if we talk, so 23.3 billion is going to be for another for 2020 fiscal year, right? For the entire year.
2021.
2021, yeah. So,
Yeah.
so is there a specific, because again, maybe you cannot give us, as you mentioned, specific insights. So what do you think NASA would be spending this money on? Any specific projects you think will be, again, as part of that is going to be Artemis, Mars, or maybe any kind of future missions that we're not aware of? Can you share some of those?
You know, I would just be guessing. I did not, and I guess because I knew that, you know, that was just the Senate version, and I don't know what the House version would be, and it would probably be some kind of compromise. And so I did not pay any attention to how those funds were allocated, because they are, you know, they specify, you know, space science, or you know, Artemis, or you know, Mars, or whatever other you know, not only, I think, I'm not sure a lot of people understand that, you know, for example, people cannot donate or contribute money to NASA. If they did, it would just go to the government, you know, because
Interesting.
the way the federal government works in the US is Congress is the only one who can tell NASA how much money they're going to spend. And they don't like anyone else. They don't even like anyone donating.
And why is
You know,
that?
they,
What
yeah.
what's the main reason behind that? Because
You know,
I think
again,
public
I
would like
think,
to get involved with that.
again, you know, that's just the way it's set up. And certainly I had no part in
Yeah.
that, but I think it's just wanting to maintain that control, is that, you know, we tell you how much money you can spend and what you're going to spend it on. And there's nothing, nobody can do anything about that. You know, in fact, the term was augmenting appropriations. That was what was not allowed. You know, I use that often. Somebody would say, well, can we do this for that, or do that, or can we get this money, or, you know, no, we can't augment our appropriations.
Well, I understand. I understand if that money would be going to the roadworks. I mean, you can say, okay, we just gonna keep this road a dirt road for the entire year or two, and that's perfectly fine. We can live with that, but we cannot live without innovation in space because, as you probably guys, and maybe we can talk about again space innovation and how many different products and again the kind of the things that we have at home and use it for a day-to-day basis and we take for granted because a lot of those came from again those space innovations and having space flights.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't have a list in front of me, but
Yeah.
but but
I know.
but you know, things like a few random things that come to mind. You, you know, fire protection equipment, the like spacesuits. So the suits that firemen wear when they're putting out a fire, you know, were helped created by NASA. And you know, at least in terms of satellites, you know, GPS and communication, cell phones. Um, you know, it is funny. A lot of people give NASA credit for things like Teflon and Velcro. NASA did not invent those. NASA used them quite a bit, but we didn't have any part in inventing those. But I think even rubber tires for your car,
Mm.
you know, NASA contributed to. So you're absolutely right. There are any number of everyday kind of things that NASA technology, you know, because it was being developed for use in space and was converted to be able to use for everyday kinds of services and products and activities on Earth, that a lot of people have no idea that there's a NASA connection. And of course, you know, most of my world is not like that, but even people who live, uh, talking about the world at large, even when the space shuttle stopped flying in 2011, there are people who live in this city who thought we closed, and that just
Wow.
blows my mind that they're so unaware of what, even with all of the fabulous social media work that NASA, I think,
Yep.
does, to promote the space flights and the astronauts and everything they're doing. To think that people who live nearby actually thought NASA had closed when we stopped flying the space shuttle. I guess they just forgot about the space station, which is now, I was just talking to, we had our Christmas Zoom with family yesterday. None of us traveled. And one of them, I don't know, she's a niece, I guess, who's, a teenager. And I pointed out to her that, every day and every other teenager on this earth, uh, who's still a teenager, has not lived a day of their life without someone in space. We just had the 20 last month, November, the 20-year anniversary of full-time occupation of the space station.
That's
And,
beautiful.
and, and of course, NASA's doing continuing to work on Orion and supporting what SpaceX and Boeing are doing, and any number of other things. And that's just what I'm involved in here in the human space flight. All the space science
Hmm.
and aeronautics and things at other NASA centers. So NASA as a whole, again, I tend to focus on the crew. I won't say manned, the crewed space flight, but there's any number of things otherwise that the NASA agency is working on that have nothing to do, the Jet Propulsion Lab sending rovers to Mars or to the moon.
Yeah. That is beautiful because again, like it's very interesting. First of all, coming back to the point that you mentioned that the person who thought that once the space shuttle program was over in 2011, that person thought that the government funded agency just got shut down, which is interesting. But can you talk again for the people? Because personally, I think space shuttle program was something is unbelievable. I just love the way it looked. I mean, I never seen space shuttle flight.
Yeah,
Personally
here.
myself, I never seen a launch, but I seen again through the power of social media. I've seen on YouTube multiple times. I think I've seen all of them, and I mean, it's unbelievable. So as far I hear the stories of the people who watch those, so they said it's something that is just mind-boggling. But can you talk to the people again and explain like why space program, just like space shuttle program, got like why it was over?
Well, so back up a little bit. I don't think a lot of people. So the last Apollo flight, of course, was Apollo 17 in 1972, and NASA had known for a little while that because of lack of desire to fund it, that what otherwise could have been Apollo 18 and Apollo 19 were canceled. And in fact, the Saturn V rocket, at least for the most part, would have been the Apollo 18 rocket, is at the Johnson Space Center. So that's a real rocket, a real Saturn V. It never flew, of course, but it was all space hardware, and so that's kind of cool to get to see. But so I'm not sure a lot of people don't realize that as early as 1972, when the last year that we sent guys to the moon, the space shuttle program was already being developed. In fact, I have a copy of what they call the request for proposal, and it's a paper document that NASA sent out to U.S. industry saying, "Hey, we plan to award a contract for the design, development, test, production of this thing called the space shuttle, and we're going to be accepting proposals. And here are the instructions for submitting it and design requirements and that kind of thing." And it's from 1972. So it wasn't as if we stopped sending men to the moon in 1972 and then just you know waited around for
Mm.
5 or 6 years. Of course, started working on Skylab or the Apollo Soyuz test project and Skylab also in the mid 70s. But 1972, they started early work on the Space Shuttle. And so I actually started at NASA in 1975 and spent a couple of years there before. It was 1979 when I was assigned to the Space Shuttle Procurement Office. And so it was a group of 8 or 10 or 12 of us. And so our job was literally to buy the Space Shuttle orbiter vehicles. And actually that's why I got this. It was a gift. Rockwell International, I don't know if you can read it or if it's backwards, won that contract to build the Space Shuttle orbiter vehicles, and now we're just talking about this. The external tank was built by Lockheed Martin, and the main engines were built by another company, and the solid rocket boosters by Morton Thiokol, but the Space Shuttle orbiter vehicle was built by Rockwell. And this was just a gift I got for being part of that team. And of course, one interesting thing about this is it shows how old it is that if you have watched videos and seen photos of the external tank, it's orange instead of white. But I don't know if you know, the first 2 Space Shuttle flights, it was white. And that's because they thought, because it's super cold oxygen and hydrogen in there, and they thought they needed to put this white paint on it to help protect, for thermal protection from ultraviolet light that could cause it to be more difficult to maintain that low temperature. As it turned out, after 2 launches, they realized that they didn't need to paint it white, so they just left it its natural orange color. But yeah, so I got to, and so this was 2 years, 1979, when I started working on that. That was 2 years before the first flight in 1981. And so actually, it is kind of interesting. My career, I started a few years before the first orbiter or space shuttle flight, and I retired a few years after the space shuttle, the last space shuttle flight. So it was the bulk of my career, and I spent many of those 42 years working in the space shuttle program. But I think in the end, so by 2011, it had been flying for 30 years, and we had lost 2 of them. And not that the remaining ones were getting that old, but I think it was one of those things where we did realize that we needed to start thinking about what we were going to do next. And so that was about the time, again, the last shuttle flight was 2011. And I had mentioned earlier, 2006, 2007, the Constellation program, where we were going to go back to the moon. And so anyway, we couldn't do both. The US Congress just would not give NASA enough money to do both. And so the decision was to, okay, well, rather than just, although eventually we, like I said, the Constellation program was canceled, although Orion and SLS survived, they decided to stop flying the shuttle so we would have enough money to continue working on Orion and SLS and that kind of thing. So I think it was, just a financial budget consideration that was the main reason the shuttle stopped flying. But lots and lots of people really, really hated to to see it go.
Yeah, yeah. STS 135. That was the last one,
Yeah,
2011, wasn't it?
135. Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah, I
that
think July of 2011. Yeah.
yeah, so that was beautiful. Again, those moments were beautiful to watch. Again, part of that is, I mean, the Hubble telescope that was there because of the space shuttle, and now
Mhm.
we're again because it used to do the maintenance, and now we're looking forward to again having James Webb, telescope there, who's going to be changing the Hubble, who's been doing a phenomenal job all the time. So part of that, because again, as far as I've seen, you've been working with Fred Hayes. I don't know if sorry if I'm butchering maybe the surname, but Fred Hayes.
Yeah.
So he's part of Apollo 13 mission. He's been part of that. As far as I've seen, you've been part of that work on a space station programs also with him.
Yeah, so that was actually, so again, going back to I'd mentioned that uh, I guess I was maybe still a teenager at Apollo 13. I had that temporary job with the TV networks, and so I was working for the TV networks when the oxygen tank exploded on Apollo 13 that night, and so along with everyone else, we stayed up through the entire night. So I think that was the first night of my life that I never went to bed. Uh, anyway, so yeah, Fred Hayes was the lunar module pilot on Apollo 13. And so I already had kind of felt a special connection to him as, being there on site and part of all of that huge activity that was going on throughout, all over the world, covering what was going on with the astronauts as they were, trying to get home safely on Apollo 13. And so that was 1970. Um, and so then fast forward to 1987, and Fred Hayes had retired from NASA around 1977 or 79 or something like that, and gone to work for Grumman, who had built the lunar modules actually. And so I think he was very familiar with the company. And so I was working on a project to support the space station, to put in place a contract, engineering support contract to support the Space Station Program Office. And it was, so we had and that was actually a year I spent at Kennedy Space Center. And we had a competition among aerospace companies to be the company to provide that engineering support to the Space Station Program Office. And Grumman won the competition. Their only competing company was TRW. But so when Grumman won the competition, they appointed Fred Hayes to be the new president of the Grumman Space Station Program Support Division. And so he and I negotiated this 10-year, almost $1 billion, it was 900 million, 10-year $1 billion engineering support contract for the space station program. And again, he and I negotiated it. And so he signed the contract for Grumman and I signed the contract for NASA. And I still remember after we finished the negotiation, got a handshake on the final deal. And so for the first time, we had some social time. We went out to dinner together. And of course, I wanted to talk with him about Apollo 13 because, I'd never brought that up during our business sessions. And it became very clear early on that he had no desire to talk about Apollo 13. But it was interesting because he was very animated about talking about being a test pilot. And he had actually crashed in an airplane once. Obviously, he survived, but I remember he rolled up his sleeve and he showed me the scars, the burn marks on his arm that he still had. And so I got to talk with him about, being a test pilot. And then for the next year and a half, maybe 2 years or so, we worked together on that contract. And so I was in his office at least once a week, for a management tag up meeting kind of thing. And so we got to be, pretty good friends. And then I ended up taking a different job. This was at a place called Reston, Virginia, in Northern Virginia, which is about 20 miles outside of Washington, D.C. And I ended up taking a job downtown NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. and they ended up changing the program and its space station program. And so the what had been the program office in Reston, Virginia, was moved to Houston, and he moved back to Houston where he had lived. And so it was kind of funny. So that was 1987. About 10 years later, it was about 1997. I had moved back to Houston. I was at a high school football stadium watching a track meet because my son ran track in high school. And I looked over in the stands and there's Fred. And, oh, wow, what are you doing here? And it turned out he was there. One of his nephews or something like that was also on the track team. So I got to, my wife and one of my other sons was there. And so I got to introduce them to Fred. And so we kind of, stayed in touch a little bit over the years. We're still Facebook friends. In fact, I'm even Facebook friends with one of his granddaughters. And I see him every once in a while. He still does a fair amount of, public speaking. And I mentioned the Astronaut Memorial Grove. When they have a ceremony, he's one of the guys who, because he lives nearby, often volunteers to be one of the speakers to tell stories about the astronaut who they're dedicating the tree to. So yeah, I think that was definitely one of the highlights of my career, was getting to work with and know and become friends with one of the Apollo 13 astronauts, Fred Hayes.
Got it. So that is a beautiful story. So I mean, all these unbelievable things that, I mean, you personally did your like 42 plus year career, because you still continue to work with the NASA Alumni League at the same time while we're talking. So like, what would you consider kind of your biggest achievement so far in all these years that you got?
Oh gosh. I don't know that I ever thought about uh, an achievement. Again, people ask me about one of the highlights, and I mentioned getting to work with Fred. Um, I guess one of the biggest honors I got, NASA in 2010, I was awarded the Exceptional Service Medal,
Mhm.
which is one of the proudest moments in my entire life. To think that someone at NASA thought enough of whatever it was I had done to award me an Exceptional Service Medal. Almost makes me emotional just thinking about it. So that was certainly a proud moment. Um, I guess to answer your question though, what was the greatest accomplishment? You know, um, Believe it or not, one of the it was one of the most recent, so it's easy to remember or think about. One of the last things I did before I retired was, you know, when our astronauts going back and forth to the space station, they had to go back and forth from Russia, Kazakhstan,
Mhm.
and we had to return them home. We had a Gulfstream 3 aircraft that would fly over there and pick them up and fly them home. But the plane was getting older and it didn't have a long range. It had to make multiple stops. And I remember one time I had a meeting. Uh, in fact, it was, Doug and Bob on this first, Bob Benkin was in this meeting. And the meeting was about, hey, we're having trouble with, we need to go pick up our astronaut from Kazakhstan in a couple of weeks. And we're having some problems with one of the engines on the Gulfstream 3. And we're not sure we're going to be able to get parts. So we may not be able to fly our plane over there. So we need to make some kind of contingency plans in case that plane can't fly. And so Bob was the chief of the astronaut office at the time. And I still remember in that meeting, again, that was the first time I'd ever had met him, and his face never changed. I mean, he was, it was a serious meeting, right? We got a problem here, and we need to figure out what to do. But I'll just never forget that look on his face, is just consternation, and never smiled or uh, changed the expression at all. So anyway, NASA decided, well, let's try to get a newer, better plane. We couldn't do that to fix this problem. And in fact, so they had me work on trying to maybe possibly charter an airplane, but it turns out that the part came in and they were able to fix the plane, and it handled its mission okay. But again, long term, let's fix this and get a different plane. Not necessarily a new one, but a newer one. And so again, one of the last things I was assigned to do was told to buy a Gulfstream 5 airplane. It could be used, but they wanted it by, this was summer of 2016, when we were just about to have a presidential election in that November. And so they asked me for a schedule, plan of when we would be able to get this and start using this airplane. And I managed an office of about 25 people, and thank goodness, because we don't buy many airplanes. And one of the reasons is it's really, really hard to get approval to buy one in the first place. But there was a woman who was working for me, who had been involved in the purchase of an aircraft, 15 years earlier, and she was still there. And so I at least had someone who had some idea, how to do this process. And so she put together a schedule that said we could have the plane by February of 2017. And the director of flight operations, said, no, I want it by September, the end of our fiscal year, September 30th, 2016, because we're going to have a presidential election. And if a new president comes in and flips up, turns over the apple cart, so to speak, and we don't have our plane, who knows when we'll get it. And so then, oh my goodness, I don't know if we can do this, but, move up the schedule 5 months. And anyway, again, to make a long story short, we with a lot of luck, and so they made me the source selection official, which meant that in the competition we would have it was actually brokers submitting bids on, okay, here's the plane I have, here's how old it is, here's how many hours the engines have on them, here's how much I'll sell it to you for. I got to pick which plane to buy, and I remember asking me, "Are you sure you don't want an astronaut to do this?" And they said, no, we want you to do it. And of course, I was working really closely with an astronaut, Gregory C. Johnson. There are two Greg Johnsons. But so I got to pick the plane, and it was actually the plane I picked had been a corporate jet for Nike, and $13 million, which was a deal, because just a couple of years earlier they'd been going for 30 or 35 million. And so we managed to get it, and it flew into Ellington Field, which is about 10 miles from Johnson Space Center, I think September 29th. And again, so many things had to happen just right, and so much luck, which is just the opposite of what normally happens. There's normally, all kinds of things you aren't expecting go wrong and have to be done over. And so anyway, and so of course now, thankfully, we're starting to get SpaceX and hopefully soon Boeing taking our astronauts back and forth, so we don't have to go to Kazakhstan to pick them up or take them over there. But in the meantime, the last 3 or 4 years or so, every time one of our astronauts would come home and they would land at Ellington, and they usually had some social media or film or something, and I watched those astronauts walk off that plane, I thought, that's the plane I bought. So that was a good feeling. And so and again, accomplishing it on time, as the director of flight ops wanted it to happen, although it involved a lot of luck, I felt really good about. So that was maybe one of the things I felt best about in terms of having accomplished.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I've seen the photo, which of course we're gonna post it up for you guys so you can see again Herb standing in front of the
Oh yeah,
Gulfstream 5 that he purchased. So that is
yeah,
awesome. That is awesome. I mean, you solved a pretty big problem, which of course, as I mentioned, hopefully, these privately owned companies will solve that problem of traveling, to
yeah,
Kazakhstan and
yeah,
picking the astronauts.
yeah, yeah. Well,
So
and one interesting thing about that too, the Gulfstream 5, which I'd never really thought much about. I was talking with one of the astronauts, and he said, well, because I asked him, well, so can this one fly from Kazakhstan to Houston nonstop? And he said, well, yes, it could, but it would have to fly over the North Pole. And you don't think about that. You look at a map and you think, oh, well, it just goes, but no, think of a globe. It could actually go, directly over the North Pole from Kazakhstan to Houston. But they decided, no, we don't want to fly over the North Pole. And so what they end up doing, I think it was either, I think Scotland, they make one stop from Kazakhstan to Scotland, and then from Scotland to Houston. Yeah, so they still have to make a stop, but they had to make multiple stops before in the Gulfstream 3.
yeah. So I don't think the Gulfstream like 5, it's probably the longest distance unless they're planning to upgrade with the Boeing 747 or something like that when it can go nonstop. Probably if it can, I don't know. I'm not a
Yeah.
professional pilot. I don't know these things,
Yeah.
but yeah, definitely. So there is a lot of different things that we need to solve as people and make things less complicated. But part of that, I want to transition maybe to a little bit different side, if you don't mind, and ask you a question because, I mean, you worked 42 years. I'm just going to continue to mention that because, like, there are people who work in that long, but there's not many of us. And
Mhm.
first of all, it's a big enough problem and obstacles that we have to go through to get into NASA, especially now, as I mentioned, maybe the process of doing so, which maybe a little bit different, maybe easier, who knows? But it's tough, and you have 42 years of experience working there as well. So I think it would be not a shame not to ask you the question that follows, which is a lot of people ask about that, speculate it. It's been in the movies for many years, and we create $100 billion worth $100 million worth movies about that, as about extraterrestrial life form and things are being out there. So what's your personal take? And maybe you can answer the question, if NASA or somebody found anything else besides us being on this planet.
Yeah, that's a a good and interesting question too, because I have been asked that. People think, well, you would know, right? I mean, they
Yeah.
would trust you. And yeah, so I feel like after that long, and have, like I said, I've worked at 3 different sites and visited every one of them, and know hundreds of NASA employees, including, astronauts who have been in space, and also many other senior NASA officials, including some of the NASA administrators like Charlie Bolden. And I met Jim Bridenstine here recently, who's the current NASA administrator. And I feel very comfortable in saying that there is no secret, there's no hidden uh, uh, knowledge or vision or citing of uh, or facts about any extraterrestrials visiting the Earth or being seen in space. I will say, however, that, and again, I'm not an astronomer, but just given the sheer magnitude and immenseness of our universe and the billions of stars and planets, I am absolutely convinced, without a doubt in my mind, that somewhere out there is life. Now, and it may or may not be human. It may look like ET, or some, who knows what kind of form, some other living being, other than a small animal of some kind, an intelligent being might look like. But it's hard for me to grasp in my mind that something like this universe could exist without, and we're the only intelligent life in the entire universe. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Right?
That would be
I
kind
will
of,
say, however, also that
yeah.
uh, I don't think there's any chance of intelligent life in this solar system. Uh, and I mean, I think we've with the Hubble and other kind of uh, missions sent out to other planets. We've seen enough and know enough about their makeup. I think what only the first three, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, or even terrestrial, or other than gas, those you couldn't live on, you know, Jupiter or Saturn or Uranus, or they're just huge balls of gas. Um, but so I don't know if that answers your question, but and I'll, yeah, and I don't. So I didn't quite answer. I'm not sure if you asked. Do I think extraterrestrials have visited Earth? I think no, because why if you think about what it would take, the technology and intelligence to be able to fly from one solar system, because I don't think it exists in this one, to another solar system and find us here, and then just keep going, or not stop and try to interact in some way, just hover over some lights and then take off again. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Again, just common sense kind of things to me. I, I can't process that.
Mm. Yeah, I do understand because but just looking at if we're gonna look at the Drake equation, and again the fact that you mentioned the universe is so vast, and we have universe which is expanding at the rate of the universe, faster than the speed of light, while we're talking at the same time, since the Big Bang, or at least as far as we know. And again, we are talking about again the life forms in our solar system, which of course it could be not. Again, I think we have some of the NASA's missions are going to be going to Europa, one of the
Mhm.
Jupiter's moons, uh, because of the kind of thick ice crust. There could be something underneath the water, as the fact they speculate. They talked about
Mhm.
Venus phosphine for a minute. And again, so again, it could be there, but now we're just kind of guessing. We still don't know, and we're still trying to figure things out at the same time. So
Mhm.
who knows? But another thing that I want to ask you is again being part of that journey, and again spreading your message. And first of all, NASA Alumni League, that's for the people to watch. And of course we're going to put it up in the show notes, the link that you can go and check it out. Can you talk about again any upcoming events, and I'm sure they're going to be kind of on Zoom, probably just like this, any type of events, and what are you going to be talking about in these events?
Um, well, yeah, so uh, we do have uh, mainly what the NASA Alumni League does. Well, I'm not sure if I can say mainly what we do, because we do multiple things, and they're all important to us. But one is just a social kind of thing. It's an opportunity. People who going all the way back to Apollo, astronauts and flight directors are members of our league, and so we have social get-togethers every once in a while, and or at least did. Um, and we have a monthly program where we try to bring in, or we don't try to, we do bring in a speaker, just any wide variety of subjects, um, for the, and so we did those in person, of course, until March or so of this year. And then we started doing them on Zoom. And actually, you know, I, I wish I could, but they don't want us to, you know, publicly spread
Mm,
the you know, knowledge of you know, the details, because
got
I think we might have too large of a crowd. So anyway, you know, I can't really invite the world to join us on those Zooms as much as I might like to, but we recently had one from someone who worked on one of the Mars rover projects. It turned out one of the interesting ones. It was one of my early ones after I had retired. One of my first meetings. We had Amy Ross, who works. Is kind of the lead spacesuit developer at the Johnson Space Center. And so I'm sitting there in this room with her, and she's got some gloves and some other fabric and talking about developing spacesuits. And again, her name is Amy Ross. And it finally clicked with me. The guy sitting right behind me, Jerry Ross, an astronaut who had, I think he may still hold the record for most spacewalks. And it finally clicked to me that, wait a minute, that's his daughter. And I thought, how perfect is that? The guy who has done, you know, the most or the longest number of hours of spacewalks in US space history, Jerry Ross, his daughter is the one who's developing
mm,
the spacesuits. And so that, you know, just one example of how cool things can happen
yep.
here at the Johnson Space Center.
She has a perfect mentor. I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
in this specific case. So again, last question because I do understand. So first of all, I really thank you again for coming over today and sharing your personal values and why people should be part of this. And again, there's lack of still attention, I think, that goes towards like space agencies, including NASA, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on because like what you've been doing and you continue to do again through Alumni League right now, it's very important because I'm sure you're doing for the similar reasons, which you're looking right now with the younger people to add more value and kind of help them to understand why space should be important.
Mhm.
So on that note, I mean, how do you help your, because I know you have children too, so how do you help your children again to follow their own personal dreams, and do you talk about space and make that important kind of one of the priorities? And what would you say for the people who are listening then they're new and they're looking to get involved with these projects as well?
Well, I have to say it's interesting that yeah. So I have two sons, but they're now actually they just had birthdays last month. They're 28 and 31, and uh, neither of them are in the space industry. You know, they had different passions, interests, if you will, and I certainly would never, as much as it means to me and as much as I love it, would ever even think about trying to force them, you know,
Mm,
to do something just because it was what I thought they should do. So anyway, one is a he got his master's degree in computer science from MIT. And so he's a senior software engineer now for a company in Boston. And my other son is in graduate school and in San Diego, studying. I'm not sure remember what they called it. You know, intelligent kind of military intelligence kind of kind of thing.
mm,
Uh, but yeah, so I do. You know, I mentioned I make myself available as much as possible uh, in person, at least previously, or on site now, you know, to anyone who, if they have, and especially children, uh, kids or a classroom uh, who would be interested in hearing about NASA or space, you know, think I don't think I've ever turned anyone down. In fact, in one time someone asked me, we were talking about me doing a presentation with I think a small number of children, and I said, "So how much do you charge?" said, no, oh, I've never charged anyone, and I never will. I don't do this for them. I don't need, thank goodness, I don't need the money. And so I just do it because I love doing it. And because, again, I want to encourage, again, especially children at the youngest age as possible. And so I do a lot of volunteering. And so one of the things one of my favorite organizations is an organization called Girl Start. And it was based in Texas, Austin, and a presence here in Houston. And the idea is to get young girls from kindergarten to 12 interested in STEM activities. And so they have all kinds of events. And one of the first ones I volunteered at was at a local school, and there must have been 300 young girls between like the ages of 6 and 12, or 7 and 12, or something, 8 and 12, something like that, and spent the whole day doing experiments and projects and hearing about STEM, and it was awesome. It was wonderful. And so I went back and have continued to do other volunteers. In fact, if you go to my Twitter page, my top pinned tweet is about that day, supporting volunteering for Girl Start. And recently in the United Kingdom, I became associated with a website called majortim.space. And it's actually a young woman, I don't think she's 18 years old or something like that, who started this website and is mainly for children. And so she recently had a video contest, and she asked me to be one of the celebrity judges. And so I got the youngest ages from, like, I don't remember now, 6 to 9 or something like that. And so they submitted, short 3-minute videos, and I got to pick which I thought were the best. And so that I loved that. And so now I've become friends with these. And so it turned out that, I was amazed at the quality of the video and the interest and the passion of these 6-year-olds. And so now I've become Twitter friends with, them and their families. And here recently there was in Ireland, this is one of my favorite stories. There was a young boy who has some kind of a disease, brittle bones, and he was on a late night TV show in Ireland. And they asked him, and he was, in a wheelchair. He could actually walk, but he spends most of his time in a wheelchair. And they asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. He's like 8 years old, I think, or something like that. And he said, well, do you want to be an astronaut? He said, well, I'd like to be an astronaut, but I can't because I have brittle bones. And he said, oh, well, what do you want to do instead? He says, well, I want to be a Capcom in mission control. And the interest that this young boy got from that TV show. And so they ended up contacting me. And so the BBC breakfast show I guess based in London, one of the producers sent me a note saying, hey, would you do a video for Adam? And so I said, yeah, and of course I think, to think I've got to the point where I can just create my own video now. Wow, 10 years ago, I never would have dreamed that I could do that. So anyway, I that, and she only gave me a couple of hours because they needed to put together a program for their breakfast show the next morning, and they're 6 hours ahead of us, right? And so I put this video together and sent it, and she just asked for, I think, 30 seconds or something like that. And I tell people it was, and so I they showed the video on the BBC breakfast show the next morning. And I tell people, I'm glad they only asked for 30 seconds because I was just about to get tears in my eyes as I was finishing speaking. So emotional about how this young kid wanted to be a Capcom at NASA when he grows up, and that they asked me to help, encourage him to do that. And so anyway, I can go on and on and on about the ways that I'm looking for to like I said, especially the young kids, to encourage them, and not just STEM. Certainly that's one way, but again, I'm living proof that a business person can have a wonderful career at a place like NASA too. I will say, in fact, speaking of that, I looked at the numbers from a couple of years ago, and about a third of the employees at NASA are engineers, but about another third of them are what I would call business, finance people, and then the other third are scientists and doctors and astronauts and that kind of thing. So we're a pretty good chunk of NASA employees too. So for all of you out there listening, certainly I encourage you to be involved in STEM, but if that's not your passion, there are other ways to get jobs at NASA than STEM.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I love the story about making the video, and that's coming back to the point of carrying the video recorded cassettes through the 6-lane traffic to now recording the videos via Zoom. What a turnaround, like 720
Right,
degrees.
right.
So that is beautiful. I mean, I love the story because stories are so powerful, and it feels like and it looks like you have so many more of these. I mean, we're talking about 42 years of your personal journey, which continues right now, with NASA. So the title fits really good, with lifetime with NASA, and you're spending that life again educating people, and now the kids, which we see, like personally, the young generation is getting a lot of interest into space and exploration and all these different projects that are happening. So I do definitely encourage you, for you guys for watching and listening to these episodes, get in contact with Herb. You can of course find, as I mentioned, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and the rest of the social media, including with the rest of the links for the websites. So go and get in contact with this man. Again, if you have anything going, just like you mentioned, majortim.space, maybe have a similar organization or something that relates to, teaching kids about space and what's happening. And, so it looks like, again, Herb, as he mentioned, he would spare the time again to educate those people. So that is beautiful. So for you guys, if you share this episode with a friend, that's all I'm asking for today, because this is I mean, it's incredible, the amount of inspiration, the stories, the passion, and the reasons why people should be part of this big picture, which it's fascinating. So if you just share this episode again during these times, it's definitely will brighten up their personal day and will inspire them to do and get involved with some of these projects. And again, Herb, for you personally, is just I'm super grateful again that you came on in the show today and share your incredible journeys. Because personally, I love the journeys. I love the stories, and I love listening to those. Which again, you have a bunch of those. So I really appreciate your time today.
You're very welcome, and thanks again for inviting me. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for saying that. So again, guys, make sure to share this episode with your friends, and as always, I'll see you next time. And until then, don't forget to keep exploring.